Hey, what's up guys? Brian from Zombie Guitar here. Here in this lesson I want to talk about the Mixolydian mode in a ton of detail. So this lesson is going to be divided into 3 parts. The first part, we're going to first take a look at Mixolydian chord progressions, what constitutes a Mixolydian chord progression, and then writing melodies within the Mixolydian framework. The second part of the lesson is going to be about borrowing chords from the Mixolydian mode. Then the third part of the lesson is going to be about soloing within the Mixolydian mode and the mindset shift that takes place when you want to shift your thinking away from a major key or a minor key type of thinking and start thinking in terms of modal soloing. All right. So throughout this lesson, I'm going to use popular songs as examples to help explain these concepts, to help you to understand these things. And if, as always, I always put links to any and all relevant lessons below. This lesson will have a write-up to it, all the charts and all the diagrams that I use in this lesson. It will be found in the link below. Also, for full access members of my website, I will have improv backing tracks to help you to practice soloing up and down the neck within the Mixolydian framework, and then targeting the chord tones and stuff like that. If you want to learn more about what it means to be a full access member, there's also a link to that below. So check out those links to all that stuff. It'll definitely help you out. But with that said, let's get started on the lesson. Okay, so let's first determine what dictates a Mixolydian chord progression as opposed to a major chord progression or a minor chord progression. So if you watched my other lesson called Understanding Modal Chord Progressions, which is one of the lessons that I linked you to below, in that lesson I talked about the concept of characteristic chord combinations that you look for, which is just 2 chords in combination with one another that's your trigger to let you know, okay, this is a mode as opposed to just a major key or a minor key. So the Mixolydian characteristic chord combination is a major chord followed by another major chord that is 1 whole step lower than it. So when you see those 2 chords in combination, in your mind, that should immediately be the thing that says, okay, this is Mixolydian now. All right, so let me just give you an example of what I mean. So let's take the G major chord here. So that's G major would be rooted on the 3rd fret. All right, so 1 whole step lower than the G major chord would be the F major chord. So if G is rooted on the 3rd fret, F major is rooted on the 1st fret. All right, so you could play just those 2 chords, or you could throw in maybe another chord. You might want to throw in the C major. So alright, so I started on the G major, I ended on the G major. It was pretty solidified to the ear that the tonal center was G major. G major was the 1 chord, okay? But why was that Mixolydian and not just the key of G major? Well, if you look at your circle of fifths, you look at your 6 diatonic chords that are found in the key of G major, grouped together on the circle of fifths, F major is not one of those chords, okay? If I wanted to do strictly G major, I could start on a G major chord, then move to maybe the C major, D major, E minor, B minor, any of the other chords starting and ending on a G major, and it's going to be the key of G major. So I just played some chords from the key of G major, started on G, ended on G. The tonal center was G. The 1 chord is the G major chord. But because I just played only chords found in the key of G major, we were 100% in the key of G major, otherwise known as the G Ionian mode. But as soon as you go and you throw that F into the mix, technically that's a non-diatonic chord of the key of G major. And that's your giveaway. The fact that that F is in there, 1 whole step lower than the original chord, 1 whole step lower than the G major chord, which is your 1 chord. That's that characteristic chord that you look for that lets you know, okay, Mixolydian mode time. So let's now look at some popular song examples to help solidify this concept. Okay, so let's look at some popular song examples here to help explain this concept. So let's start out with Ramblin' Man by the Allman Brothers. So Ramblin' Man by the Allman Brothers, it's in G. It starts out with this intro part. All right, so that's right there, 12th to 15th fret. That's that G major area, G major pentatonic. I call that the home box. All right, and the right after it does that intro and he starts singing, the chords that he's singing over go from G major to F major to C major to G major. All right, so right there, the chords that are being played, you see that characteristic chord combination. You see the G major chord followed by another major chord that's one whole step lower, the F major, then going to the C major, back to the G major. All right, so it's that characteristic chord combination, G and F. Now, let's look at the framework up in this 12th to 15th fret area that would make the difference between G major versus G Mixolydian. So let's look at G major first. So G major up here between this area, 12th to 15th fret. Red dot is your note G, so red dot to red dot you have. All right, then red dot to red dot. Okay, so that's your G major scale. Now the difference between a major scale and the Mixolydian mode, the difference between G major or G Mixolydian is just one single note. And that one note difference is the 7th scale degree being lowered by 1/2 step. So let's first find our 7th scale degree. The 7th scale degree is the note that falls right before the red dot. So starting on the red dot, that's your 7th scale degree. And on the G, going from the next red dot to next red dot. Okay, so that's your G major scale, and you determined your 7th scale degree. So if you lower that 7th scale degree by 1/2 step, the result is the G Mixolydian mode. So starting from now pink dot. Alright, and then you can go from pink dot to pink dot in the next octave. Alright, so you're just lowering the 7th scale degree by 1/2 step. The result is the G Mixolydian mode. So let's listen to what the singer is actually singing to start this song out. So after he does the intro. Alright, so it's. Alright, I'm not going to try and sing it because my singing voice is not really that good. But you can just hear that he's targeting this note right here on the 13th fret of the high E. Okay, that note right there. All right, so that note right there, it's the melody. The melody is the singing part. He's singing in Mixolydian because the chord progression is dictating that it is Mixolydian. So let's look at another song example. Let's look at Hey Jude by the Beatles. So that is actually an F, and the end part, the na-na-na part at the end, is the Mixolydian part. So the progression that they're singing na-na-na over starts on an F major chord, moves to an E flat major chord. So you can use this F up here on the 8th fret to help see it clearer. So F major, followed by the E flat major, which is one whole step lower. F is rooted on the 8th fret of the A string. E flat major would be rooted on the 6th fret of the A string. Going to B flat. back to F major. So again, it starts on the F major chord, moves one whole step lower, plays another major chord, then goes to another chord, then ends on the F major. So you're starting and ending on the F major. You see that characteristic chord combination in there, one whole step lower than the original chord. Mixolydian mode, okay? All right, so let's look at let's look at the melody line, the na 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 part. What's going on? So let's find that same pattern that we just looked at. The way you find this pattern, you can always take your pinky, locate the root. So in this example, our root is F. Okay, this is F Mixolydian now. So you locate your root F with your pinky on the low E string. It's right here on the 13th fret. So you can just play that same pattern that we just looked at. It's just now shifted a little bit. Alright, so let's look at the na-na-nas. It goes. Alright, so I kind of bent. When he says hey, he goes. So that note right there. That's that Mixolydian note. That's that lowered 7th degree note. Okay? Alright, so again, the melody line is taking place in the Mixolydian mode as dictated by the chord progression. Alright, so that's another example. Okay, so let's look at two more song examples that essentially borrow a chord from the Mixolydian mode. So both of these song examples are going to be in the key of A. We're going to first look at the song I Think We're Alone Now. The second one is Jessica by the Allman Brothers. So both of these are in A, and all the chords are part of the key of A major. But then you'll notice that the G major chord is thrown in there. So again, G major would be that chord that's one whole step lower than A. So if A is on your 5th fret of the low E string, G major will be on the 3rd fret of the low E string. So as soon as you see that G major thrown into the key of A major, you think Mixolydian, okay? You immediately think A Mixolydian to yourself. So let me start out with the easier example first, and then I'll get on to the second one. So the first one will be I Think We're Alone Now. So I'm just going to play it and then just listen to where you hear that G major. Okay, so take a look at the circle of fifths first to determine what the chords are of the key of A major. So it's A major chord, then moves to the C sharp minor chord, then moves to the F sharp minor chord, then to the E major chord. So all those are part of the key of A major. The chorus of the song is A major to E major to D major to A major. Okay, again, all part of the key of A major. This borrowed Mixolydian chord, the G major, that comes right at the pre-chorus. All right, so right before the chorus occurs, the G major is thrown in there. Okay, so again, I'm not going to sing this. I'm sorry, but take a listen to. I'll just play it. Okay, so did you see how right at that pre-chorus that G was thrown in there? And it added some interest. It still sounded like it worked. It's still, everything sounded in key. Nothing sounded wrong. But it switched things up from purely the key of A major, and it added some interest. It spiced up the major chord progression. All right, so the next song I want to talk about is going to be Jessica by the Allman Brothers. So again, this is in A. It starts out, it's in A major. You don't really know that that it has anything to do with Mixolydian until that G major is thrown in there. All right, so the song starts out. You could either try and play the full bar chord on the 5th fret, low E string, or you could just play the high 4 strings, the D, G, B, and E strings, and then just kind of put your pinky down right here on the 7th fret of the G string. Alright, so that is the rhythm that's happening during the whole lead. Alright, so nothing there is Mixolydian yet. Okay, so here's your A major scale. Looking in this area right here, this position. I call this the A string home box because your root is located on the A string. So you take your pinky, you put it on your root, which is A, which is here on the 12th fret. So your A major scale here is. Okay, so that's your note A right there on the 10th fret of the B string. 1/2 step lower than that is the 7th scale degree. Okay, so that's the A major scale. If you want to make that the A Mixolydian mode, you just take that note right here on the 9th fret and you lower it 1/2 step. So, okay, that same note can also be found here. All right, so that's the note you're listening for. So A major, A Mixolydian. Has a different sound. So the whole song, as the soloing stuff is happening over this part, it's all A major stuff. Nothing. He doesn't hit that Mixolydian note. But then the rhythm section moves on to the G major chord. Then back to the A. And it's when it's on the G major chord, that's when the Mixolydian stuff starts happening. All right. So listening for this note. So the part specifically that I'm talking about is where it goes. All right, so did you hear that note? When he walks up that scale there. All right, so that right there, the reason it sounds cool and the reason it sounds interesting is because he's switching from the A major scale to the Mixolydian mode. It's just one note difference, but it just adds that Allman Brothers-esque feel to it, all right, if that is a word, all right? So Allman Brothers do that kind of stuff all the time. I just wanted to point that out, that one note, and it's all happening because it's all dictated by that characteristic chord combination. Okay, so for this third part, I want to give you like a mindset shifting approach to soloing in a mode if you're not already used to it. So you may be used to soloing in major keys, you may be used to soloing in minor keys, but you may not be used to thinking in terms of modes. So you could either approach this by thinking in terms of parallel modes or thinking in terms of relative modes. Both approaches are completely legit. It doesn't matter which one you do. It's just the way that you think about it. So let's take the parallel approach first. So The parallel approach just means you play your G major scale patterns anywhere on the neck of the guitar, but then anytime there's that seventh scale degree, you just lower that by 1/2 step. So if you're here in your 12th to 15th area, like we talked about in part 1, if you wanted to play your G major scale, it would be okay. Lowering that 7th scale degree by 1/2 step would make it the G Mixolydian mode. Okay, you just have to be aware of where that 7th scale degree is. So if you're playing your G major scale down here in this 3-note per string pattern type thing, rooted on the 3rd fret of the low E string. Alright, you just know that your 7th scale degree would be lowered by 1/2 step. Okay, so that's the parallel approach. Perfectly fine if you want to do it that way, because whatever gets you to solo in the Mixolydian mode freely without having to think too much is the best way to do it, okay? So if you want to take the parallel approach and just play your G major scale patterns and just have an awareness of where that 7th scale degree is, lower it by 1/2 step, the result's going to be the G Mixolydian mode. Perfectly fine. The other approach would be the relative approach. So I'm sure that you know that modes come from what is known as a parent major scale. So first, if you want to determine your parent major scale of the G Mixolydian mode, the way you do that is you know that Mixolydian means 5. Mixolydian is built off the 5th scale degree of some major scale. Okay, so if G is 5, if Mixolydian is 5, G is the 5th of what? G is the 5th of C. Okay, here's G, or here's G here, here's G here. G is the 5th of C. Here's C. So if G is the 5th of C, your parent major scale of G Mixolydian would be C major. So if you wanted to take the relative approach, rather than thinking, okay, G major, lower 7th scale degree, 1/2 step, do that. Instead of thinking that, you could always think, okay, G Mixolydian has the same notes as C major. So you could then go ahead and just play your C major scale patterns all up and down the neck, and everything's going to be fine. So if you wanted to play your C major scale like this, okay, but you just have to be aware that your tonal center is not C. You can use that scale pattern, but your tonal center is going to be G and not C. Okay, so alright, so nothing wrong with taking the relative approach either. Just be aware of where your tonal center is. You can also take it one step further, and you could think to yourself, all right, well, if I know that C major is the parent major scale of G Mixolydian, and I know that C major and A minor are also the same thing because A minor is the relative minor of C major, and maybe you're more comfortable playing in like your A minor pentatonic type of scale patterns with your extra diatonic notes in there. That's fine too. You can use those patterns. You can alright, A minor stuff is the same thing. It's A minor is the relative of C major. C major is the parent major scale of G Mixolydian. It doesn't matter how you think of it. It's all the same notes. A minor is the same notes as C major, has the same notes as G Mixolydian. Up and down the fretboard, it doesn't matter what patterns you use, it's all the same exact notes. But again, you just want to be aware of where your tonal center is. So if you want to be playing this A minor pentatonic region between the 5th and 8th fret area, you can do that, but just be aware of where your G's are. So that's if you wanted to think in terms of minor scale patterns that you may be familiar with. Again, just be aware that you're not in the key of A minor. You're not in the key of C major. If you want to take the major relative approach, you're in G Mixolydian. So if you want to use those patterns, that's fine. Just be aware of where your tonal center is. All right, so taking this even one step further, what you see here on the screen is your G Mixolydian mode spanned across the entire fretboard. These are the exact same notes as the C major scale, spanned across the entire fretboard. The only thing I did differently with the diagrams is I now made the red dot to be a C, indicating that this should be your C major scale patterns. If I wanted to make the colored dot white and make it be the A, here's that. A minor scale patterns. It's all the same thing. It's all the exact same set of notes up and down the neck of the guitar. Let's make it back to G Mixolydian though. Now I just highlighted the note G. The pink dot indicates the note G. Any one of these scale patterns will work. It doesn't matter which ones you play. It doesn't matter how you choose to think about it. You could take the parallel approach or you could take the relative approach. No matter what, it doesn't matter. The important thing is you want to know where your tonal center is. So an even stronger way to solidify your tonal center than just being aware of where the G note is, you also want to be aware of where your chord tones of the G major chord are. So as you're doing your phrases and your licks and all that stuff, no matter what pattern you decide to use, just be aware of where the G major chord tones are, because the progression that you're going to be soloing over for the improv backing track that I'm going to provide you with is a G major to an F major to a C major to a G major. So it starts on G and ends on G. So you want to kind of time your licks and phrases to land on a chord tone of the G major chord. All right, so the green dots within this framework here, this is the Mixolydian framework of G Mixolydian. The green dots are your G major chord tones within this framework, okay? So any of the green dots are going to be either a G, a B, or a D, which are the three notes that make the G major chord, okay? So no matter what pattern you choose, so just time your phrases so that you land on one of these green dots, these chord tones, or if you want to play in this scale pattern, if you want to think to yourself, okay, C major scale pattern, C major 3-note per string scale pattern that you may be more familiar with, but it's not C major, it's G Mixolydian, so you want to make sure that you're Alright, so I kind of started out thinking C major scale pattern, but making sure to target these G major chord tones. Or if you want to play down here, 5th to 8th fret area, if you want to think in terms of A minor scale patterns, it doesn't matter. A minor scale patterns are perfectly acceptable, but it's not the key of A minor. It is the mode of G Mixolydian. So within your A minor scale patterns, if that's how you prefer to think of it, up and down the fretboard, you still want to have an awareness of where the G major chord tones are. All right, so if you're playing here, 5th to 8th fret, Okay, so hopefully that lesson was able to clear some stuff up about modes if you weren't completely clear on them. I know that's one of the most common things that people are confused about in the guitar community, what modes are, how to use them, you know, the whole thing about how they have the same notes as a particular major scale. That confuses people. They're like, well, if it's the same notes as a major scale, then why isn't it just the major scale? Why is it a mode all of a sudden? Hopefully this was able to help clear some stuff up. So just a quick review. A modal chord progression, a Mixolydian mode chord progression more specifically, comes from a major chord and then followed by another major chord that is one whole step lower than the original major chord. When you see that characteristic chord combination, that's the thing that you think, okay, this is Mixolydian. That chord is also very commonly used to be thrown into progressions that are otherwise completely major. So if you're in a major key and everything's 100% diatonic to that major key, but then you decide to throw that Mixolydian chord in there, that chord that's one whole step lower, you can do that, and essentially you're borrowing from the Mixolydian mode. And then when you want to go and solo in the Mixolydian mode, you can either take the parallel approach, which is to just say, okay, well, this is the major scale, but the only difference between the major scale and the Mixolydian mode is just one note. The seventh scale degree is one half step lower than that of the seventh scale degree of a major key or a major scale. Or you can take the relative approach. You can think, okay, well, Mixolydian is 5, Mixolydian mode is the 5th. So if G is the 5th of something, what is that something? G is the 5th of C. So that's my parent major scale. So if you know what Mixolydian mode you're supposed to be soloing in and you want to determine your parent major scale, just think, okay, I know my mode. That's the 5th of something. What is that something? And then you do a little reverse thinking about it, and then that's how you determine your parent major scale. So then you could just use the major scale patterns that you're probably more familiar with than the modes. So that's that. So as I said, the write-up for this lesson will be available in the link below. Charts, diagrams, all that stuff. Full access members, if you want to practice soloing this stuff and targeting the chord tones of the one chord within the Mixolydian framework, that's something that's available for full access members. But that's going to do it for this lesson. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you next time.